Hi, Sam from TAP here. Going to go over a presentation here with you guys today to discuss the results of really what is the most comprehensive testing that has been done to date on string stops, specifically our string stops, then also looking at stock string stop from Athens that comes with their bows. So I'll show you here what the stock string stop is. This is a limb saver node. Used a camo node. Of course, this is aluminum, solid aluminum bar. And then the TAP string stop, which many of you, of course, are familiar with. Titanium rod here, vortex material inside, adjustable coupler, set screws, and you have the carbon fiber rod, of course, that goes into the riser. So what did we find? Very interesting data is what I gathered today. I have up here a chart that shows the 3 shot strings that were taken with each of these configurations. We have the TSS, which is short for titanium string stop, with no gap. So that means that it was shot with no gap between the string and the node, string lightly touching the node at rest. Then you had the TSS with a gap, which was about 1/16 of an inch. And then the Athens no gap and the Athens with a gap. These tests were conducted in a very controlled, consistent fashion. Distance from the measurement microphone to the position of standing when the shots were taken was 15 feet. A lot of tests were done prior to this in various scenarios, and the data that was gathered then is backing up and confirming what we're seeing now. So let's start with looking at just what the decibel levels were that were registered with these shots. The TSS with no gap, which is typically how I run my own bow and which I've recommended for a long time that these string stops be set up this way. These are the results that came in from that. And this is just peak volume. I'll get into in a bit here showing you pictures that represent the entire spectrum of noise that occurred during shots and discuss some of the pros and cons that are present with various types of setups. So we had 67.2, 66.9, and then 67 for an average of 67.03. No gap is, in my view, as you'll see here, even though it's slightly higher on the peak decibel average than with a gap, in my view, it's a superior way to run this string stop. And I'll show what that means to me, why it is that I conclude that. Now let's look at with a gap. You have 66.6, 66.5, and then 67 for an average of 66.7. Not really a substantial difference, just 0.27. I'm sorry, 0.33. Actually be 0.33 over. And, we're looking at, what is ultimately not likely to be something that you would easily detect with your ear, but it is something that you might be able to pick up in certain areas of the spectrum, and I'll get to that when I show you the graphs. And then the Athens no gap, we have 67.23, and Athens with gap 67.5. So no matter how the Athens stock string stop was set up, we have louder peak volumes regardless compared to the TAP stop. I'll take on my own bow, I'll take this, and I'll get to that in just a second, but I'll take that for, for some important reasons. When you look at, though, say 67 up to 67.5, now you're at 0.47 of an increase compared to those with those two, or if you're looking at from here 66.7 all the way up to 67.5, it's 0.8. So 0.5 and up is enough of a difference to really start to take notice and to consider how it is that you're running the setup and also what equipment you're choosing to use. So if you were going to use the Athens stock string stop with your bow, I would certainly recommend that you run it with no gap. In other words, again, string lightly touching it. And I'll look at the graphs here now and show you what is a typical result from each of these configurations. So let's start with no gap TSS. And I chose a picture that represented what is most typical in doing these tests. It's very common that we see the spiking occur at this area. This is indicative of the initial thump. And in some of these graphs, you can even see the oscillation of the string as it's repeatedly striking the node. It's difficult to be certain in some cases if each strike will be represented on this graph or not. But we can determine that that is where that initial thump occurs. When you look at across the spectrum, though, you're starting to see a dip, and then when we see the suppression below this level in this range, that's pretty ideal. So why would I choose to go slightly louder and run no gap with our string stop than I would to run with a slight gap? Let's go back to that. So the TSS with a gap, you can see it is a little bit lower in this area than it was with the no gap where the initial strike occurred. But you have spiking occurring through that region. That is more of your twang sound that the string will make. And with the gap in place, that is something you're going to get more of the string oscillation. Our goal is to bring that string down as quickly as possible. So the microphone is set up in a way that it does value, in most instances, lower frequencies more, because it's calibrated to be running based on human hearing. And with that in mind, it is going to read that at a slightly higher value to it. So with the no gap, or with a gap rather, that we're looking at here, even though these frequencies are probably at least as high as the no gap configuration was in this area, the microphone is more interested in placing value on the lower frequency. So I don't want this string twang, and I can even hear it to my own ear. That's something that I'm looking to eliminate. I believe that carries a lot of weight in terms of how it affects your in-the-field performance. So that's why I choose to run no gap versus gap. Now let's go to the Athens string stop. Again, fairly typical response that we see. This is a no gap scenario. We see up and down spiking through here, which in some cases you see it, some cases you don't. It does seem to indicate, though, that the string was perhaps oscillating a little more than it was with ours. And you have similar levels, but you have so many of these through here that are at that similar level that this is something you don't want to see. And then you have some spiking that's occurring, not quite as high, though, as it was with the tap string stop with a gap, or rather with a gap, which I'll get to. So with no gap, you can see it was below what the Athens was with no gap. But when you run the tap string stop with a gap, you'll see that that is actually a bit higher than the Athens is. So hands down, in my view, you're going to get the best feel, the best overall gut reaction to the shot with the TSS set with no gap. Now let's go over to Athens, no gap. And like I said, it's certainly not terrible. At times you will see with some of these graphs this running a bit higher. Sometimes you'll see it run a bit lower. Overall, though, you get relatively similar performance, but you are still getting a louder peak volume than you are with a tap stop. Now to the Athens with the slight gap. Again, that gap is about 1/16 of an inch. This is rather startling. So we have this curve and a lot of what appears to be individual strikes occurring in that range. Definitely a very loud shot in this case. And also you look across the spectrum and look at all the spiking you have in the higher range. Again, the twang, the more higher pitched resonance that you're getting with the string oscillation. So definitely would not recommend running an Athens stop with a gap. And if you are going to use one, I would say, butt it up against the string. You don't want the string pressed back. With our bow, with our string stop rather, on a bow, it's a bit of a toss-up. In terms of what you really want. But to me, I want an elimination of as much of the felt higher pitched resonance, and that is coming with no gap. The gap, again, you have that slightly muted overall peak frequency that would be detected by your ear, or animals that have a similar range of hearing, or how they place value, how their ears place value on different frequencies, but you're also getting along with it some undesirable higher frequency. So back to the no gap tap, this is pretty ideal. Now you see a little bit of spiking in through here. Really not a concern because that's such a high pitch and it does not carry a lot of ability to travel far in distance. Whereas, the lower frequencies do. If this was elevated much higher up into this range, then yes, these high pitches would be very concerning because they would carry further downrange. But I like the muting through here. This is where, to my own ear, I'm able to detect the difference because this is not present to the same degree. So to finish up, go back to the chart here and show you again what the numbers were just on decibel levels. The dBA scale, which is what is most commonly used when doing tests on sound pressure level, because it is what we perceive sound to be, and that is obviously of great importance when measuring how industrial noise is being emitted or how a product will be perceived by customers in terms of noise. Tap string stop with no gap comes in at 6703. Tap string stop with gap 66.7. Athens no gap 67.23. And Athens with a gap 67.5. I feel like this is really encouraging. Very conclusive data to show that there is superiority. And it is detectable to the equipment, obviously, but it's even detectable to the ear. And so many people have said that now for years. And this kind of data, this empirical data, confirms that. So thank you guys for your time. As always, you invest a lot of time in us. We try to give back as much as we can to you. TitaniumArcheryProducts.com is where you can go to find out about all our products. And soon we'll have a testing data area set up on the website so people can look at these kinds of things and draw their conclusions about how well our products do work.